Join the coven. How a door-to-door salesman convinced me to work for his company. A story written by AuthorJoJo. I'm sure you've all had a friend or two on Facebook that got roped into some pyramid scheme job after high school. See how they tend to hound you and anyone else that will give them the smallest inkling of attention. Most of these people become so invested in these schemes because, for one, they typically have to put some of their own money in. And second, they are consistently told that putting in more effort will lead to higher production and sales, which is the gateway to better pay and perks. So it's easy to see how such a thing can snowball into the persistent nature people in these positions take on. It's a recipe for desperation and depravity, and unfortunately, that's exactly what showed up at my door last week. I had just gotten home from work and was waiting on my wife to bring our kid home from school so we could talk about what to make for dinner. Shifting through the cutlery, my heart nearly lunged into my throat when I heard a doorbell ring. My immediate thought was that it was my wife who had either forgotten her keys or had her hands full. Otherwise, I might not have opened the door, or I would have at least peeped through the window first to see who it was. Instead, I made my way to the front door shouting, "I'm coming!" loud enough to be heard on the other side. Quickly I undid the lock and swung the door open, and where I expected to see my wife stood a man. He was well dressed, despite the ever-increasing temperature outside. He looked like he had lost his mind, wearing a suit and tie out in such weather. When I saw the briefcase in his hand, I quickly connected the dots and spoke firmly. "Sorry, I'm not interested." Placing my hand on the door to begin closing it, I saw my wife's car begin to pull into the driveway. I thought it would be odd to close the door on the man and open it again only moments later for my wife, so I kept it open, offering the man a faint smile. My wife is the playful type. It's never mean-spirited, but we would always do things that we knew would slightly irk the other. So it wasn't surprising when my wife, with son in tow, walked up to the door with a sinister smile and asked me who the man was. Before I could respond, he turned to her and began to go through his script. "Hello, I'm just here to offer you lovely folk a chance to buy some infinity knives, the edge that never dulls." His voice was commercial perfect, almost like he had been crafted by gods to sell things. My wife let out an excited puff of air and slapped my chest, conducting our son inside the house. With glee, she exclaimed, "Honey, you were just talking about how much you wanted some new cutlery." We exchanged glances. Her eyes were enthused. Mine was less so, but that only fed her devious mind more. "Please, tell my husband all about it. He's always having trouble with bones when he cooks." Other than being playful, my wife knew I didn't like to let people down or make them feel bad. So she had effectively roped me into a discussion with the guy. A discussion she politely excused herself from to go lounge around inside. I tried to keep a gentle expression as my irritation bubbled up inside. Each knife he showed me made my tension raise. They were pretty, sure, and I did not doubt that they were likely sharper than the knives we owned. But when he asked if he could give me a demonstration, I had to decline, simply stating that the price point was just too high for me. That's when he started on his pitch for employee incentives that would lower the cost of the knives. That was about all I could handle, and as politely as I could, I shut the conversation down and I shut the door. Which should have been the end of it. But you're reading this, and you're smart enough to know that it wasn't. Later that night, I was cleaning up after dinner and couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Our kitchen has one window over the sink, but someone would have to stand on something to look into it. Yet I still felt the pinpricks of observation. I tried to shake it off and finish washing the dishes. The next morning, I came to find that one of the knives I had left in the sink had somehow snapped in half in the middle of the night. It wasn't some jagged break like it was under pressure or fractured from temperature change. It was a clean, almost mechanical cut. Just the large knife I used to cut larger meat was damaged. None of the smaller ones or any of the other utensils were touched. I wasn't thinking much of it when I showed my wife. She jokingly replied that I should have bought some knives after all. With a smirk, I agreed with her, replying that maybe he'll make the rounds again. It didn't seem like anything at the time. You don't see darkness when all the lights are turned on. So when it was quiet the next day, it slipped even further from my mind, and I had long since forgotten of the salesman. And then, on the day after, as I woke up early and decided to get the paper, I was met face to face with the man again. As I opened my front door, I was bewildered and wondered how long he had been standing there. Then I rationalized that it was more likely he was just about to knock before I showed up. I continued being polite, but started to add a firm tone behind kind words. "Look, man, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested," I spoke. There was a moment of silence, long enough to notice that his hair had become rather ruffled and his clothing wasn't nearly as form-fitting as it was before. I even started to sympathize with how hot it must have been in that getup. "I think you'll change your mind after a demonstration," he spoke again, opening up the black briefcase, revealing the knives neatly packed inside. The light from the sun bounced off the metal and landed right onto my eyes, hazing my vision. "That's not gonna happen. Try another house," I said, holding my hand up to shield my eyes from the sun. I hadn't even noticed that I stepped back when the sun hit my eyes, or that he had stepped forward, putting his black dress shoe through my front door. "Just let me show you. You'll buy some when I do," he adamantly claimed, inviting himself inside. I watched him walk into my house and look around like some tourist, and felt my exhaustion and frustration bubble up. Reaching out, I grabbed the back of his suit and pulled on it, conducting him back to the front door. Pushing his body through, I grimaced at him when he repeated the same nonsense about a demonstration. I'm normally nice, but I can be spiteful as well, and letting that get the better of me was probably my biggest mistake. "You know what?" I smiled, offering another kind glance. "I'd absolutely buy a knife after a demonstration." I allowed my expression to drop. "But you'll never get the chance. Get off my property!" I cut myself off from him by swiftly shutting the door in his face. The whoosh of air pushed my wife's hair around as she stood next to me. I hadn't even heard her approach, but I'm guessing the small scuffle had woken her up. At least that's what her stern glare was portraying. "That was crazy," she said, still half asleep. "Everything okay?" With some assuring words, she stumbled up back to bed, and I sat watching out the front door to make sure there weren't going to be any more visitors. I spent the majority of the morning there until the rest of the house went about our day. My wife helped my son get ready for school, and I headed off to work. I was a little more tired than usual, but luckily my shifts aren't very long, and I was able to return home before my son, whom my wife had already left to pick up. Falling onto the couch, I closed my eyes for a moment, and before I knew it, I was being jerked away by a knock at the door. It was loud and frantic, but stopped after a moment. Slowly, I walked up to the door, realizing that an hour had gone by since I had gotten home. Leaning to the side to peek through the window, I saw a familiar black suit and immediately got myself ready to call the cops. As I turned around to reach for my phone, I heard the salesman through the door shout, "Sir, I brought a demonstration." His words were not as formal as they had been before, not as sales pitchy, much more demanding and full of bass that I didn't think a guy of his frame could produce. I thought just maybe I'd watch the damn demonstration and send him on his way. I should have been wary when I first noticed an hour had passed. A whole hour. I informed him that if he steps inside my house again, then I was going to call the cops. He didn't reply, but I knew he heard me. I opened the door just a crack so that we could meet eye to eye. He was sweating something awful, looked like he hadn't showered in days, certainly smelled like it. Even his suit had darker patches all over it where liquid had soaked in. "The demonstration, then leave," I demanded. He smiled and opened his briefcase to show me the neatly organized knives inside. I went to shield my eyes from the sun again, but there was no glare. It was then I realized the dark patches on his suit weren't caused by sweat as I thought. The suit was soaked with the same glossy red liquid that was coating the knives in his briefcase. "Your wife said you were having trouble with bones?" he questioned. The word wife stuck in my head more than anything. They should have been home by now. They should have walked in the front door shortly after I'd fallen asleep. With my hand on the door, I slowly pushed it further, revealing more and more of my front yard. "The infinity knife slices meat with so little effort, it's like you're cutting the air," he continued, his words distorting as I watched a few people behind him standing around in awe. All of them were neighbors. Some were on their knees. Some were on their phones. The worst of them all were the few that were looking at me. From so far away, I could see pity in their eyes. "Nothing can resist infinity." His words had become that of a monster's, twisted and growling in my ears. With the door fully open, I could see that my wife's car sat in the driveway. They had arrived back home. The driver's side door was open, and spilling out of it was her body, covered in clean red lines that spilled her blood onto the driveway. Her hand was reaching towards the house, a hand that was missing several fingers, revealing the white bone underneath that had been cleanly sawed through. I felt my body going limp as I noticed the back door of the car open as well. I never got to see that body. The cops told me it was something a father should never have to see, especially after witnessing the mess that had become of my wife. It's hard not to see her still. It's even harder to see her the way I want to. All I can see is the shredded up version of her. Chunks of skin missing, deep cut along the throat. What's worse is I'm not sure what happened to the salesman. Somewhere between me passing out and the cops showing up on scene, witnesses said he ran through my house and vanished into the backyard. The problem is the guy looks so damn average. If you imagine a salesman, you'll see him on every car lot, at every door, and in every infomercial. He's there. The guy was kind enough to leave a calling card for the company, though. The cops are investigating it, but I'm not willing to wait. I got some new knives. They were a lot cheaper with the employee discount. I got a lot of hard work ahead of me, but I figure if I work my way up, I'll find him. I'll show him just how cutthroat of a business these pyramid schemes can really be. So, anybody need some new knives?